All right, welcome to part 2 of the health bar tutorial. So we're just going to continue right where we left off here. So like I said, the last widget we need to create is our HUD widget. So I'm going to come back here to the widgets folder again. We're going to right click, say new user interface. We're going to select the widget blueprint and we'll call this the HUD widget. Obviously, if you already have a HUD widget, then you can just use your existing one. But since I don't, I'm going to create one here real quick. And then let's just open this up. It's going to be really simple. The only thing we're going to add to it is our health bar. So we can just type up here health widget and drag that onto the canvas panel. You can see it populates it. I'm going to hit size to content just so it actually sizes correctly. And then I'm just going to anchor it to the bottom left. And then let's just zero out these values here. And then for the alignment on the Y, we want to set this to 1, so that way it puts it in the bottom left corner. And then we can kind of move it out a little bit. We'll say like 30, -30. And there we go. So now it's in the bottom left corner. File and save this. And then we just need to make it so that this widget actually shows up on the screen. So to do that, we want to select our character. And then we want to come over here and we want to edit his blueprint. So open up this guy's blueprint. And then in the begin play, we actually just want to add that widget to the viewport. So I'm going to drag over this begin play just so I can do my stuff before all this stuff happens. So we just want to say create widget. And the widget we're going to create is our HUD widget. The owning player is going to be the controller. So we can say get controller. And then it wants a player controller. So we'll just cast to player controller. And then we know this is going to succeed. So we can just right click and say convert to pure cast. And then hook that up like so. And then we want to take this return value and add it to the screen. So we'll say add to viewport. And there we go. Let's make sure we hook this up as well. And now if we compile, save, and run it, you can see at the bottom left, we have our health bar showing up. Obviously, it's not representative of our actual health because, well, we don't even have health yet. And we don't have any way to damage or heal our health. So that's what we need to do next. So I guess, first of all, let's add health to our character and a way to damage it and to heal it. So over here on the left, let's add a variable and we'll call it health. And we'll set it to a float, and we can make it private as well, just so nobody else can access it. And then we will also take this and let's just duplicate it, and we'll call it our max health. And then that one, we also want to set it to blueprint read only, so it can't change after the game starts. Maybe you want your max health to change after the game starts, I don't know, but I don't want mine to change, so I'm going to set it to blueprint read only. And then we'll set the max health to like 2000, I think is what I had before. And then also in begin play, let's go ahead and drag this over a little bit more. We want to make sure we set our health, which is our current health, to whatever our max health is. So that way, if our max health is 2000, then when the game starts, we're going to start out with 2000 health. All right. And then also, just so we can kind of see what's going on here, let's go to our event tick. So right click and say event tick and add one of these in. I'm going to move it down here. And this is just for debugging, just so we can see our health, make sure everything's working good. We'll do a right click, print string, and I'm going to drag off of this and say append. And then in the A, I'm going to type health, colon, and then a space. And then for the B value, I'm going to pass in my health, like so. And then I'm going to change this little drop down here, duration to 0 seconds, so that way it only prints out for 1 frame. And now if we press play, you can see at the top left, it says health is 2000, which is correct. All right, so now we need a way to actually damage the health and heal the health. So to do that, obviously in your game, you're going to want to have some actual damage system, which there's a million tutorials out there for damage systems, literally a million. So I'm just going to set it up so that you can do plus key to add health and minus key to take away health. But ultimately, all you'll need to do in the end is modify this health variable, and then the widget will update correctly. So however you want to do damage in your game is totally up to you. So again, just for kind of debugging purposes, we'll say the numpad plus key and the numpad minus key are the two debug keys I'll use. You can use whatever keys you want, doesn't matter. So we want to add health when you press plus and remove health when you press negative. And to do this, I'm going to make a little function over here, or another event. So add custom event, and we'll call it edit health. So you can keep this event in your game, like even if you're doing health a different way, because all this is going to do is just safely modify the health and make sure it doesn't go below 0, and also make sure it doesn't go above the max health. So to do that, we want to click on this, we want to add an input parameter, and it's going to be a float, and this is going to be the amount. So this is how much health we're editing. So we want to take this value and say float plus, and we want to add it to whatever our current health is. And then we want to set our new health to that. So we'll drag this in and say set. But before we do that, we want to make sure, again, that it doesn't go below 0. And you also want to make sure that it doesn't go above the max health. So we'll say clamp float. The min is 0. The max is going to be our max health. And we'll hook that up to there. And there we go. So now all we need to do when they press the plus key, we'll say edit health. And we'll heal them like, I don't know, 500 health. And when they take damage, for this one, I'm actually going to do a random number so you can see how it works with different values. So we'll say random float in range. And we'll pass in, make sure you pass in negative values here because you're taking away health. So we're saying negative 50 for the min, or sorry, negative 500 for the min, and negative 50 for the max. And it's very mad about something. Oh, they probably just need compile, save, refresh. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't get the name correctly and then it gets confused. So okay, so we have 500 and a range between negative 500 and negative 50. All right, so now we can test this real quick before we actually do the health bar thing. So if I press, oops, that was loud. If I press my plus key, nothing happened because I'm already at 2000. If I press my negative key, you can see at the top left there, it took away a negative amount of health. And if I keep pressing it, it goes down to 0, and then it never goes below 0. And then I can press plus and it goes back up. So again, obviously the health bar doesn't work yet. Don't think it's supposed to work yet. We're just looking at that health bar, the health value at the top left to make sure we can modify our health. Okay, so now that that's working, we need to actually hook up this health value to that progress bar. Now, in order to do that, we could go to our health widget and we could come in here and kind of bind something to it that gets the owning player and then casts it to a character, and that would work totally fine. But a slightly better way to do it would be to make an interface for it, so that way you can reuse this for other things, and that this health widget can be used for, like, you know, an enemy's health, or it's just so much more dynamic if we use an interface for it. So we're going to do that, and it's not much harder at all. So we'll come back here to the content folder, and then we're going to make a new folder here, and we'll call it the health interface. And then inside of here, we're just going to create that interface. So right click and go to blueprints, and blueprints, blueprint interface. And we'll call this the health interface. Now, if you've never used an interface before, I can explain briefly what it is. If you open it up and look at it, you can see it kind of looks like a normal blueprint, but there's like a whole bunch of stuff missing on the left. You can't have variables. You can't have like macros or components, anything like that. You can only have functions, which you define over here on the right. And the functions you don't actually implement inside of the interface. The functions get implemented by anybody who defines the interface. So it kind of creates a common set of functionality between multiple different blueprints, depending on who defines it. So in this case, we want to just add 2, and you can add more to this in the future if you need more functionality, which I'm sure you eventually will if you're making a health system. So the first one we're going to do is called get health. And then down here, we want this to return a float variable, which is going to be the actual health. And then we'll just rename this to be result. And then we can actually make it const as well. You don't have to do this, but it's a good thing because if you make a function const, it's basically making a handshake with the computer saying, hey, this function is not going to modify the invoking object at all. And since it's just getting the health, it's not setting the health, we're not going to modify it, so we can say it's const. And then we're also make another one, and this one's going to be called get health as ratio. And so the difference between these is get health returns the actual health number between 0 and whatever your max health is. So, like 50, 500, 1500, whatever. Get health as ratio returns the value from 0 to 1. So if you're at your max health, it's going to return 1. If you're at 50% health, it's going to return 0.5, and so on. So for this one, again, we also want to return a float, and we'll just call it result. And then again, this one can be constant as well for the same reasons. And then we can compile and save this. And then back in our first person character, we just need to implement that interface. So if you come up here to the class settings at the top, and then under interfaces on the right, we can add the health interface like so. And you'll notice when we do that, over here on the left, we get this interface dropdown. Now, if you don't see this dropdown on the left, that's because you're probably on an older version of Unreal, like 4.23 or something, older than that. And if you don't see it over here and you're on an older version, I'm pretty sure the way you see them is you just right click and you say get health as ratio, and then there'll be an option in here to like implement the function, and then you click on it. I'm pretty sure that's the way you do it in the old versions, if I remember correctly. But in the newer versions, all you have to do is double click over here, and it'll bring you to that function. So it kind of automatically implements for you, and by default, it returns 0. So let's actually do get health first. So double click on get health. So this one's really simple. We're just going to return the health value, like so. And then get health as ratio, we want to return the health value divided by the max health. So we can say, I'm just going to call get health actually, just in case that function wants to do anything fancy with the health. So we'll say get health, and then we'll divide, so float divide by the max health. And that's going to give us the health as a value from 0 to 1. Okay, so now we have our interface hooked up and our functions filled out and our health working. So now the very last thing we need to do is actually update this this guy here to animate based on our health. So to do that, it's going to be done inside of a update function that's going to be called each tick, and so it can update to whatever your health happens to be. And so over here on the left, let's add a new function called update. And then let's see here. So this needs to take in 2 inputs. It needs to take in the top progress. We'll say top progress. And again, just to explain this terminology, the top progress in the example that I was showing you before is the green bar, like your actual health. The bottom progress is the red bar, like how much damage you have. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need to do. So you have top progress, which is green, and bottom progress, which is the red part. And we want to change this to a float. So each update, we're going to be passing in the new top progress, which is essentially your health as a ratio from 0 to 1. And then we also want to pass in the delta seconds, and that's just how much time has elapsed between frames. Okay, so to do this, we need to create a couple of variables on the left here. First of all, we want to have one for the animation speed, and we're going to make this a float, and we'll make it private, instance editable, and blueprint read only. And the reason we're doing that is, well, let's set it to like 5 or something by default. But we set it to instance editable, so that way in like the health widget, for example, if you look and you click on this guy, you can see we now have an animation speed right here. So any widget where you're using this stacked progress bar widget, you can modify the animation speed, like, different for certain progress bars versus other progress bars. So that's why we're doing that. But back over here, we want the animation speed. We also want to keep track of the bottom progress. So we'll add a variable for bottom progress, and we'll make this private. And we want one more to keep track of the previous top progress. And we're going to need that in order to actually do the animation. So let's say pre for previous, and then top progress, and we'll make this private as well. All right, so now we can go ahead and start writing this function. So the first thing we want to do is we want to update our bottom progress, because let's say if we're at 1,000 health and we take damage and we go down to 500 health, that means that our bottom progress is going to be 500, because there's a 500 difference between our top progress and our bottom progress. So we want to say bottom progress, we want to set this, and we want it to be the difference between our top progress and our previous top progress. So our health and our previous health. And again, the reason we're not using the word health inside of this widget is because this widget can be reused for anything. So it can be used for shields, for stamina, for literally anything. It's not specific to health, so I don't want to have health in here. So we're going to take the, let's see here. We're going to take, oops, maybe do that. Oops. Okay. All I did was rearrange these. Let's move them back. Okay. So we want to take the top progress. So we'll right click and say get top progress, which is just this parameter right here. And we'll say float minus the previous top progress. And then we want to take this and we want to multiply it by -1. That way it becomes positive. So like if our top progress was, or if our health was 100 or 1, I guess 1.0, and then our previous health was, or sorry, if our previous health was 1 and our new health is say like 0.75, then we're going to be doing 0.75 minus 1, which is going to give us a negative value of 0.25. So we want to flip this around so that way it could be positive 2.5, because that's how much of the bottom bar, or the red bar, we want to show. And then we want to take that and we want to add it to whatever our current bottom progress is. So we'll say float plus, and that is our new bottom progress that we want to render. And then we also want to update our previous real quick. So we'll drag in our previous top progress, look that up, and we're going to set that equal to our get top progress, like so. And then we can finally set these parameter values. So we're actually going to be setting, if we go back and look, we're going to be setting these two values, the top progress and the bottom progress. So in order to set these variables, we can, let's see, come over here and we can drag in our dynamic material instance, which again is our instance of this MI health bar. And we'll say set scalar parameter value. And we're going to set it to top progress. And we're going to give it a value of our top progress. So we'll say get top progress. Then we want to do the same thing for the bottom progress. So I'm just going to copy and paste this guy. And then we'll call this the bottom progress. And then of course we want this to be bottom progress instead of top progress. And then the next thing we need to do is update bottom progress so that it actually animates over time. So drag in bottom progress again and say set. And then we want to slowly take away from it so that way the red bar shrinks over time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our current bottom progress and we're going to subtract from it. So we'll say float minus, and we want to subtract from it the delta seconds. So we'll say right click, get delta seconds, which again is just this parameter over here that we passed in. And we want to multiply this by our animation speed. So animation speed, and that's going to go into here. And then we want to clamp this value between 0 and our bottom progress, so that way it doesn't go below 0. So we'll say clamp float. So the min we want to leave to 0. The max we can just pass in the bottom progress. And the reason we can just pass in the bottom progress for the max value is because we're subtracting from the bottom progress, so there's no way it's going to go, there's no way it can possibly be above this. So just pass that in, and then that goes into our bottom progress. And then let's also just print this out so we can kind of see what's going on. So we'll say print string. And then again, I'm going to do that append thing so we know what we're looking at here. So append, and this is going to be our bottom progress colon space, and that will go into here. And then let's set this to 0 seconds. Okay. I think we might be good. Make sure you have animation speed set to something like, let's set it down to like 1 for right now, just so we can kind of see it a little bit easier. And I think that's all we need to do. Oh, there's obviously one more thing we need to do. So in our health widget, let's go to our health widget real quick. So we actually need to call that update function. So go to the graph, and then in the event graph here, we want to do 2 things. So you can actually just delete these top 2. We want to add a new one and call it event on initialize. So this gets called one time when the widget gets constructed. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that the player pawn that owns this widget actually implements the health interface, because otherwise we can't really do anything because we don't have access to the health values. So we can say get owning player pawn, which again, this is going to be the player in this case, but we don't want to really cast it to a player because that kind of makes it only work with the player. So instead, which is why we made that interface, we're going to say does implement interface. And then in this little drop down here, we want to select our health interface that we created. And then I'm just going to take this return value and promote it to a variable. And I'm going to call it initialized. And we'll make it private. So this is basically just setting this initialized variable to true if the owning player pawn implements the health interface. And so now inside of the event tick, we can drag in this initialized because we only want to do this if it's actually initialized. If the owning player pawn implements this interface, we'll do a branch. And then we want to call that get health and that get health as ratio functions to actually update the stacked progress bar. So we can say get owning player pawn again. And since we already know that it implements that interface, we can just say get health as ratio. And again, this ratio is going to be from 0 to 1. And we want to say stacked progress bar. And we're going to call that update function that we just wrote. And so our top progress is going to be whatever our health is as a ratio. So that's going to go into there. And then our delta seconds is going to be our delta time. So we can just take this guy and drag it over here. And I'm just going to double click to create some reroute nodes so it doesn't go through everything. I'm just using the arrow keys to move this in case you didn't know. All right, and let me just line this up. All right, so there we go. So each tick, we're making sure we're initialized, and then we are getting the health as a ratio, 0 to 1, and then we're updating the stacked progress bar. Now you might be thinking, why don't you only do this when the health changes? And two answers for that. One, you could if you're really that concerned about it, but you shouldn't be. And two, we actually need to do it more often than when the health just changes, because when the health changes, obviously we need to update the health bar, but it also needs to continuously update after that for a good bit while the red part of the health bar animates from full to not full. So it's more than just when the health changes. So to keep things simple, I'm just doing it inside the tick. If you're really concerned about optimization, which again, you shouldn't be, because the code that you write to optimize the event tick from getting called is probably going to be more expensive than just calling event tick to begin with, then you could technically set it up so that it only runs when the health changes and during the duration that the red bar shrinks. But again, you shouldn't do that because it's crazy. Okay, so I think we have everything set up now. We forgot to do this part of it. So we can click on this guy and we come back over here and we can bind it, and we'll say create binding because we want this to show the actual health. So we'll bind it, and then we'll call this get health text. Oh my gosh, I can't type. Health text. Okay. And then for this, again, we want to say get owning player pawn. And we should make sure we're initialized too. So we'll say initialized, and we'll branch. Oops. Hook that up. Because if you're not initialized, then this guy isn't going to have this health interface. So if we try to call it, bad things are going to happen. So we want to say get health like that. Make sure you say get health and not get health as ratio, because we want the actual numbers for this one. And we want to hook this up and hook that up. And then we want to hit this drop down here because we want to set the maximum fractional digits to 0 so that we don't see any like 0.07s or anything weird like that. We also don't want to use grouping because that adds commas, which you don't want to have commas. And then this, you can kind of select whatever you want here. It just is how it rounds the numbers, and you can select that. You can read the description of each, but I don't really care how it rounds it. Okay, now I think we might actually be good. I know I said that like 5 times now, but let's see. First person character. Let's just run this and see what happens. Okay, so if we press the negative key, well, that seemed to work pretty well. We saw the red and the green. And you'll notice if you look at there at the top right, it's going pretty quick. Maybe let's make this a little smaller because we're not done yet. There's still one thing we need to fix, so don't close the window yet. Let's come back here. Let's set the animation speed to be like 0.1 because I want to show you guys something and then we're going to fix it real quick. So if you press negative, you'll notice it does work, but the red, if you watch the red, it moves at a linear speed, meaning that throughout the entire course of the red bar moving, it's moving at the same speed. And if you actually notice from my other project, when I run it, this is my other project, when I run it, it actually is going faster at the beginning and then it slows down as it reaches the end. So if you don't want that, then you can ignore this last little step. It only takes 1 second, but I think as a nice little feature, we can hook that up and it just makes it look a little bit smoother in my opinion. And so to do that, all we need to do is come in here to our update function inside of our stacked progress bar, and we want to multiply one more value right here. So we're going to multiply this, which this is basically how fast the progress bar or the red part of the progress bar is depleting. If we multiply that by the bottom progress, which is the red part, then it's going to cause it to move faster based on, or it's going to move faster the higher that bottom progress part is. So the bigger the red bar is, the faster it's going to deplete. So if we do that, you'll notice if that's all we do, you'll notice it actually is going to move extremely slow now. And that's because we're multiplying it by like a 0.1 or something. So when we do that, we actually do need to update or up the animation speed. So if we set this to like 1 now and we run it, hopefully you can see, you can see, there you go. So as it gets closer to the end, it slows down. So now that you can obviously see that working really nice, we can set this to something 5 or a little bit more reasonable. And then each time you press negative, you see it does that. And there we go. So it seems to be working pretty well. And I think that's the end of the tutorial. So if you guys liked the video, appreciate a like and subscribe. I also have a Patreon if you guys want to support me there. It's always appreciated. And I have a Discord as well where you can come in and ask any questions that you have and somebody can usually help you out. So thanks again for watching the video and I'll see you guys in the next one.